Hello, and welcome to our presentation today, A Tough Nut to Crack, Developing an OER Textbook for Literature Courses. We are a group of faculty members from Texas A&M University in both the English department and the libraries, and we're here today to talk to you about a literature OER that we developed.
How we got here. This is part of the Texas A&M writing programs, development of OER and redesign of its writing programs courses. As Kathy mentioned, this is a collaboration between the library and academic professional track or contingent faculty. The OER surface and subtext literature research writing that we will be discussing in this presentation is our third OER for writing programs.
So one of the most complicated elements of creating a literature open textbook is negotiating copyright considerations. Literary works have considerable copyright coverage, given their highly creative nature. Furthermore, works of literature are not irreplaceable or interchangeable, given that literary expression is a key part of the work itself. That means it's impossible to write new openly licensed material to cover the same ideas. So an OER author can't just go write another wide Sargasso Sea and put it into an open textbook. And while a lot of literature is in the public domain, a lot is not as well. So creating a diversity of authors and texts was a top consideration for this work. It can be challenging to find works in the public domain because contemporary translations and/or contemporary editions are copyrighted. There were, of course, a diversity of authors writing and publishing before 1926, but those texts often do not have easily accessible records and copies available. Because of this, literary recovery, or projects which rediscover and make accessible works that have been forgotten or overlooked in contemporary literature studies, are crucial for literature OER projects. In this textbook, we wanted to be very careful about our ethical reuse of literary works. It's very important to us to support authors' rights, so finding legally licensed copies of works was absolutely necessary, either through the public domain or Creative Commons, or, as we'll talk about in another slide, different ways of making library licensed materials accessible. This was absolutely important because English departments in particular are teaching both students and creative writers. So modeling ethical open use is necessary both from an academic and from information literacy perspectives.
Based on the copyright considerations that Kathy just detailed, we developed a multi-pronged approach to our OER project. Next slide. First, we decided not to exclusively focus on texts published in 1925 or prior. Though we did intend to use many texts from this period, as Kathy indicated, it was important to include more recent works in order to make this OER work for a variety of authors, or a variety of instructors, including those who work with contemporary literature. For this reason, we also explored works for which the copyright was expired or never registered. This was particularly important for our film chapter, although we also explored these types of works for other chapters. We included links to authorized versions of copyrighted texts that were publicly available on the web, such as poems from Poetry Foundation in the poetry chapter. And where possible, we also worked with our subject librarian to purchase unlimited user ebook licenses of commonly taught texts. We wanted to avoid readings that are not good quality or not accessible. So we had a team of English professors review and select versions that they felt appropriate for classroom usage. Next slide. Once we had readings selected and, where appropriate, purchased, we added them to a LibGuide so instructors could easily find them and reuse the links with their classes. This guide is intended to be continually updated and expanded to include any free or licensed versions of new readings each semester. Next slide.
I worked on the chapter on the novel. Next slide. So the goals of the chapter on the novel were a little bit different from those of the other chapters. There was less focus on literary recovery since this section included a lot fewer texts. There were only 2. And instead, it focused on guiding students through the process of reading a longer work and on giving instructors material around which to build lessons. So I used detailed discussion questions with links to outside resources to accomplish these goals. Next slide. The questions had a similar structure going throughout each chapter. So what I did for the novels was I divided them into doable sections and then began each section with a summary to tell students what to expect in those assigned passages before they read them. Then I concluded each section with 3 discussion questions. The first is a comprehension or reflection question. The second question asked students to connect what they read to larger topics and themes. And the third provided a link to an image or outside text with a brief explanation of how that image or text related to the story. These different types of questions were important because they asked students to engage with the text at several different levels, and asking them to navigate out to like an outside image gives the eye a break from those potentially daunting Project Gutenberg HTML text that we used to provide access to the text that we studied. Next slide. So our English 203 class, for which this was written, is often taught by graduate students who may have had limited teaching experience. And so I designed this chapter with that in mind and tried to offer beginning teachers an unobtrusive helping hand. So for example, print textbooks aren't able to reprint multiple full text novels, and therefore they often don't include a section on the novel. So my introduction material provided a helpful resource for teachers wishing to teach about the background on the novel. The comprehension questions were also useful for creating reading quizzes and accountability, but most importantly, those questions connecting to larger themes and historical context could provide ideas for lectures. However, they were phrased in general enough terms to be self-contained so that no additional lectures were required. Next slide. So here's an example of one of the discussion questions that I used. You can see the first one is, what does Jane Eyre learn from Helen Burns and why do you think she admires her so much? This is just a comprehension question. The second asks students to think about the British school story and other British school stories they might know, thinking of Harry Potter and some other things, and asking students to think about that genre. And then the context question talks about consumption and the meaning of consumption in Victorian literature, and then provides a link to this painting by Dante Gabriel Rossetti that provides an example of this, what this idea asked readers to think about. Next slide. And in another question here, in the third question, I did a little bit of trying to make an immersive experience for students reading this book by providing some links to the different books that Jane Eyre reads as a child, but I made sure to provide links to versions of these texts that had 19th century style, that were from the 19th century and were contemporary additions to Charlotte Bronte, so that students could not only see the text of those things, but also a visual that would help them envision what it would be like to be in the Victorian time period. And that's what I was going for with these discussion questions. Thank you.
So in this section, I want to give an overview of the poetry chapter in the OER, talk a little bit about the diversity and copyright issues that we face, and then talk about how we use translation and text recovery to overcome those difficulties. So on one hand, yeah, it was relatively easy to achieve a great deal of diversity. And this is because most of our poems are linked out. And we linked out to organizations such as the Poetry Foundation and the American Academy of Poets, both of which are excellent organizations. They have a lot of material that we could choose from. Obviously, it's not all of it, But from there, we could get a lot of diversity. And so one example I included here is the poem by former poet laureate Natasha Treadaway, White Lies, which is about passing for white. And I have a lot of fun teaching that to my students. Of course, because of this, many desired works could not be concluded. We couldn't find places where we could link to them or where they were presented legally. And as such, my example here, Gina Valdez's English con salsa, which I absolutely love to teach. And I love to teach it because it's in Spanglish. And Spanglish really captures the experience of a great deal of our students here at Texas A&M. They live Spanglish lives. So that's for linked text. When it came to recreating full text, well, those works had to be within the public domain, all right? And so this presented a little bit of a challenge to diversity. Pre-1925, yeah, there's a lot of diversity out there, but it's not exactly well-represented diversity. So despite that challenge, we did find a few poems to include in their entirety that sort of expanded our diversity. The first is Elsa Gidlow, who is a queer woman, and I love her. Right, I'm saying it there so you can hear the pun in this title. She's writing about a forbidden love in a time in which it was forbidden. And then Yoni Noguchi's Hoku, which is actually the first example of a haiku in English. So if we wanted more diversity, which was an express goal, who else could we have included? I mean, Phyllis Wheatley came up in the discussion. We certainly all thought of Walt Whitman. And we even included a spotlight section on the Harlem Renaissance, as you can see there. And that seems like a great deal of diversity, but if we truly wanted our OER to be original, especially this poetry chapter, well, I felt that those didn't really suffice. I mean, open up literally almost any textbook on poetry, and you're going to find for the diversity section a spotlight on the Harlem Renaissance. So we decided to go in a different direction. And that is to focus on linguistic and cultural diversity. You see here, I put heritage languages, not foreign languages. This is important. In America, our heritage languages are classified as foreign languages when they're not truly foreign languages, except maybe other than German. All of these languages were the official languages of, well, people of the United States. And so I've attempted to include different authors here who showcase this linguistic and cultural diversity, excuse me. And so you see Vicente Bernal, America, Las Primicias. This is a writer from New Mexico, and this is actually one of the first volumes that's both in English and Spanish, and it is about this sort of transition into becoming an American. We have another by a Creole of color, Hippolyte Castra, who's writing about the campaign of 1814, 1815, that is about the War of 1812. And this one is an interesting bit because this is sort of at the beginning of an almost century of Creoles of colors writing extremely political writings that culminates in Plessy versus Ferguson. Of course, to appeal to our own Texas students, Die Sendung der Deutschen, right? My German is terrible, but that is the diaspora of the Germans. And then Adrian Roquette's Moquet Chanté, which is in a Louisiana Creole. And so here we have French, Spanish, German, Louisiana Creole. These are the heritage languages of our students. So here I've given you an example of what it is we've attempted to do in this section. It's mostly about translation, transcription, and text recovery. You see on the left, the original Creole version of Adrian Roquette's Moquet Chanté, which was published in Le Mississippi in 1878. You see here that Adrian Roquette was also known as Chataima, meaning like a Choctaw. He actually lived among the Choctaw for 30 years, completely forsake sort of European society. He had been living with them for about 20 years when he wrote this particular poem. And as you can see, Louisiana Creole borrows words and grammar from Choctaw. In fact, the Native American populations in Louisiana are the most ardent defenders of the French culture, of the French language and the Creole culture. So on the right, you can see this translation that we have, and this is a way, resuscitating these old texts. We have, especially with Houston near us, we have plenty of students, many students who speak Louisiana Creole, or their grandparents did, or it's something they grew up with and they want to learn it. And as you can see, that's reflected in Dr. Went's research there, Creole, a Louisiana label in a Texas context. The final thing I just wanted to end here is sort of some of the possibilities this has sort of raised up. And you can see here what is a transcription of this particular poem. And I've transcribed it into the modern orthography, modern spelling and grammar that was developed by native speaker and historian Dr. Christophe Landry. I did this because Louisiana Creole right now has around 15,000 native speakers. That is, it's a dying language, right? And so this modern orthography, there's a lot of people working to save this language, but resources are an issue. And so I think that OERs with this sort of textual recovery could play a vital role in language preservation. And just a little bit to end on for you, because how often do you get to hear a rare and endangered language? I'll read this a little bit. Moke chante. Cache dans le bas espagnol, qui s'acape chanter le bas. Mokone separo señor, côté sur le voix, qui cela.
So one thing that we want to be sure to mention is that this project was not just an OER project. It was also an information literacy project. I just want to talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So as we developed the OER textbook, we deliberately wove information literacy concepts into each chapter at the anticipated points of need. In particular, we integrated several key concepts. In our chapter on writing and research, we emphasized research and information literacy at all stages of the writing process, from brainstorming to searching to attribution. In the novella chapter, we integrated content about disciplinary databases as opposed to general databases. We also addressed foundational concepts such as authorship, intellectual property, and plagiarism throughout the text. Although we incorporated information literacy directly into the OER textbook, we also opted to reinforce this content by building library instruction into the course in two areas. First, we made an interactive tutorial that could be integrated into course shells. And second, we built time for 2 library sessions into the template syllabus to suggest optimal timing to provide students with direct library support. Through these combined activities, we hope to help students avoid information literacy pitfalls and successfully incorporate literary criticism into their works. And Claire's going to talk more about this next. Next slide.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah was saying, the OER really encouraged some changes in our pedagogy in teaching our English 203 Introduction to Writing About Literature class. Next slide, please. So OER research and pedagogy resulted in a return to the original purpose of the course. For years, our Introduction to Writing About Literature course has been misunderstood as an introduction to reading literature with research thrown in as an afterthought. Our mission via the OER dovetails with the course's redesign, focused on a return to the course's original purpose, introduction to writing, and therefore researching about literature. The OER provided its committee with the opportunity to do this, beginning with centering research in the OER's own title or surface, its cover, in its title, the surface and subtext, literature, research, writing. Next slide. Here you'll see the cover and how we centered research there. Next slide, please. The integration of information literacy in each OER chapter, as Sarah mentioned, results in an emphasis on introducing and normalizing research at an early stage in this introductory course, as exhibited in this sample from the OER's table of contents. Next slide. You'll see here at the top in the section writing about novellas, generating ideas, making claims, using and analyzing evidence and researching. This appears in the novella chapter, as Sarah mentioned, and begins researching early on in the writing process. And then if you'll look at the bottom of this slide, you'll see how we move from those initial stages of writing to showing students a sample analysis of a novella. And in this sample analysis, secondary sources are included and integrated there for discussion before students ever read the research and writing chapter, or if they are reading it in tandem. Next slide, please. The OER must have pedagogical implementation. So moving from the way the OER is structured into the course, we wanted to ensure that the writing and research discussed in the OER is then put into practice. Thus, we've included assignments emphasizing information literacy throughout the course template. Assignments are scaffolded to familiarize students with research, and library sessions are scheduled and integrated into the course structure in order to prepare for these assignments. So you'll see here, library session 1 precedes the assignment I've titled Scholarship Responses. Library session 2 precedes the annotated bibliography and leads to the topic proposal and the literary research paper. Next slide, please. Here is an example of the structure of the course. You'll see early on in the semester on a Thursday, we met in the library annex in room, well, you don't need the room number, but we met with Sarah Lemire for a library session talking about how to find scholarship on some of the works that we were studying. You'll see in week 3, so that library session happened in week 2, very early on in the course. In week 3, after the weekend passes, that Tuesday, students have a scholarship response due. And this is building on work that they did in the library session the preceding Thursday. Next slide, please. The scholarship responses are about exploring what's out there. And I've included the whole assignment here, but I want to highlight a couple of pieces in particular. I asked students to go to the university library's website and then to the MLA database and search for one scholarly source published on any of the works that we're studying in that particular section of the course. I want you to notice particularly number 5. Once they have made a citation and talked about the scholarly work itself that they've found, I asked them again to return to the piece and look carefully at its bibliography or references or works cited and identify one of the entries as a source that might be of interest to them. Copy the citation below and there they have it. Next slide, please. There are 5 of these scholarship responses, and they lead to the annotated bibliography. The scholarship responses may be included in the annotated bibliography. Students may choose to find new sources for it, but here at this point, they are sifting through the works that they have been reading, looking for other ones like them. At this point, they're also comfortable finding sources. So this bibliography that asks them to construct 7 to 8 annotated bibliography entries does not come as a shock, and they already have some material with which to work if they choose. Next slide, please. So after sifting with that annotated bibliography, we move on to focusing. And this is the research topic proposal. And again, I'd like you to look specifically at that highlighted piece. In the research topic proposal, I'm looking for students to propose a thesis, to begin to think about how to support that thesis, and to identify 1 or 2 scholarly sources that might be helpful to them in thinking about that thesis argument, and an explanation of how each might be useful. So they can go back to the annotated bibliography to look for those things, or they can find new things. Next slide, please. Finally, the course will culminate in focused research and argument, the literary research paper. For the literary research paper, they'll be using a minimum of 5 academic sources, not including primary texts, to support their thesis. And here's where I emphasize something that is emphasized throughout the OER. I ask students to think about whether they agree with a scholar, disagree with a scholar, and to discuss that. And then remembering, one of the things, again, that we emphasize in the text and here in the course, that students' literary research essays are their opportunity to join the scholarly conversation, whether they agree, disagree, or agree, disagree with conditions. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. And thank you so much for attending our presentation. We welcome your feedback and comments. Please feel free to email me, Kathy Anders at kanders@library.tmu.edu. And thank you for attending today.